Welcome to the NorthLakes Podcast. I'm today's host, Jeremy Oswald. Today, let's learn about school-based behavioral health. Our guest will be Jes Springer, who works in schools providing behavioral health therapy to school-age kids. Our conversation took place in September of 2024, just as our program was kicking off a new school year. Jes and I talked about several things, including how she works with two therapy dogs, Dave and Linda, to help her provide care. Let's talk to Jes.
So I'm Jes Springer, and I'm the director of our school-based behavioral health services, and I'm also a therapist, mental health therapist, out of the Turtle Lake office, but oversee our school-based for all locations.
Nice. And it's a big program.
It is a rapidly growing program. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we started 8 years ago with 6 school districts, and we're currently up to 19 school districts. At one point, we were at 22, but COVID threw some wrenches and things. So
and a few other things as well.
Correct. Yeah. And lots of things.
But tell me, what is school-based behavioral health?
It's really the same mental health therapy services you would receive in the clinic, but it just happens to be in the school. And so there's a few nuances with it, but overall we use the same interventions, the same books, the same toys, the same kinds of conversations that we would have with kids in the clinic. And we usually just lug a lot of those tools right over to the school.
I mean, what brought this about? I mean, how did it get started? I mean, was this your idea, or is it
No.
Is it everywhere in the world? Or
yeah,
what?
I can't take credit for that.
Okay.
But I believe that it really came about in the schools recognizing that their students' mental health needs were growing beyond what the school was capable of handling, what they were equipped and trained and set up to do. And so there were a lot of collaborative conversations between school staff members, principals, school counselors, school psychs, superintendents, and the DPI, so the Department of Public Instruction that oversees the schools for each state, and trying to find creative ways to address that. And so then that came into reaching out to community partners, mental health providers, different agencies to see what can we do? How can we better address this? And some of those conversations had been in different presentations that providers or therapists could come into the school and give to the students. So some of those motivational speaker kinds of assemblies or different videos that they would show kids in guidance class. But really recognizing that therapy services, coming in and doing sessions once a week or every other week and meeting and really digging through their individual issues was really necessary. And having so many kids missing school for extended periods of time in the day to leave to go drive to an appointment an hour away and then come back, they would miss half days of school, or they couldn't access it because it was an hour away and who can just come pick them up in the middle of the day because parents and caregivers are working or they have other children they're taking care of and other things they're doing. So it was one of the solutions that came out of a lot of those collaborative conversations.
So kind of neat. It started out, sounds like from what you're saying, it was how do we kind of treat the whole school? Mm-hmm. And it's well, that's one thing, but hey, maybe there's some individuals that could use some more one-on-one. How do we provide that?
Yeah.
All right. And boy, so how does it I got so many questions. But let's start with how does a student get connected to a behavioral health therapist in the school?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. And I always like to start by pointing out that anybody can receive those services. It doesn't have to be the kid that's destroying a classroom or the kid that's refusing to come to school or failing. It really can be anybody with any kind of mental health struggle. And oftentimes the school is surprised with the kids that we have in services because they're like, well, their grades are perfectly fine. They don't give us any problems at all. They need therapy? It's well, yeah, because there's a lot that happens internally that you don't see, you don't hear about, or things that are happening in the home that they're just not aware of. So it really can be anybody. A lot of times we have family members reach out or the student themselves have come up to us in school and say, hey, how do I get to talk to you? And that's amazing. Those ones feel really great. And so really the family can initiate that conversation. They can call the clinics themselves and say, hey, we want school-based services. And then we work them through. They can reach out to their teacher, their school counselor, their principal, anybody at the school. And those schools that we serve know the routine of who to funnel them to in order to get into services. We also will have schools that will identify a student who's struggling in some way. They're doing their interventions what they can, and they'll reach out to the family and say, hey, we have this provider who comes into the school. Would you be interested? We think that could really be helpful. And if the parent agrees, then the school can fill out a referral form that we've given them, and then they either email it to us or fax it to us or hand it to us when we're in the building. And then we reach out to the family and schedule.
How does I can see where a parent getting a call from the school, hey, here's this resource. I'm going to call it a resource, but like, if you're a parent, that's got to be a little like, how does that conversation go?
Yeah.
I could see it going a number of different ways.
And I'm sure they have gone a number of ways. Hopefully that parent is not going to be surprised that all of the sudden the school's wanting their kid to go to therapy. Because if they're struggling at school, usually there are some conversations the teachers had with the parent about, they're really struggling in class. Like, what can we do? What might be happening? And so there's been a lot of other interventions or conversations had by the school directly with the family or student before it reaches the level of, we really think they should see a therapist. And so by the time that conversation is had, the families are aware their student is struggling in school and the things that have been tried aren't working. And so it tends to go better, but I know there are some families who get that phone call and they're not happy with the school for having that conversation. And then we don't get those referrals because the family has to be in agreement. We've also had other families who have received that phone call, they've agreed to services, and then we call them to set it up and they decline it at that point or they never return our phone call. So we're always working with the schools on how do you present that? How does that conversation go? Hopefully there are those other ones that lead up to it, so it isn't a surprise, to help address this in a way that feels good for everybody involved.
Yeah. And one thing that comes to mind to me is like just that there's unfortunately still this stigma about therapy and mental health, what we now call behavioral health.
Right.
And so, and I already like that I don't want to say you blew my mind, but like that, of course, I am thinking of the student acting up in class, well, heck yeah, get them in therapy,
right.
And I love that you brought up like, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
This is a very broad question. what is the state of stigma involved with behavioral health? I know that's so big. I'm sorry, but
I guess I
but
immediately
it's still
think
there, right?
It is definitely still there. And I think it is definitely getting better where people are more willing to come to services. They're more willing to talk about mental health things. We have kids that are less afraid to be seen walking into that office over there to talk to that person that only a handful of people do, because those kids are noticing, oh, you're not in class every Thursday at Second Tower. What's going on with you?
Where do you go? Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then they linger in the hallway and watch kind of thing. So, I mean, humans are curious creatures. And so we've noticed that kids are much more willing to own it, I guess, for lack of a better, like, oh yeah, I go talk to her. Like, man, that's helpful. I don't know what I'd do without. I'm hearing more kids say those kinds of things. And yet we still have ones who will wait until after the bell rings and the hallway clears before they'll step foot into our office. We let them out 30 seconds before the end bell rings so that people don't see them coming and going. And that's okay too, because again, it's not everybody's business.
Yeah.
And another change that we've seen when we gather our data on who tends to be referred to services and enter into services is the number of males in services is increasing, and it's equal with people who identify as female. So it's, when we think of those stereotypes and the stigmas of males getting mental health services, that seems to be getting better too. And they're in there just as much as anyone else.
Yeah. Well, and is there any draw like, hey, I get to get out of class to go do this thing? I mean, I remember that's always like, hey, when I can get out of here for a little bit and get like away, that's kind of great.
Yeah. So when we're figuring out what time in the day to schedule a student, we'll ask them what time works best. And they'll say math. Like, well, sorry, bud, I'm not pulling you from math class. You need to sit in there. Or Phy-Ed, because they really don't like running or something like that. So we'll work with them to find a time that is least invasive or intrusive and they're not going to get behind. They're not going to end up in an F in it. Some kids will pick a class and it turns out they're getting an F in it because they're not there and they really need to be. Well, now we're changing your time. We need to move this to a different hour of the day. But yeah, they do like coming in.
Yeah, that's good. So how does it like, what's the room like? I mean, how does that, is it like, just, we're here in your home base in Turtle Lake and you guys have all these beautiful offices, and is there like a similar kind of setup in the schools that you're in?
Yeah. And it varies greatly. Most of the rooms that we use are a shared space with the school counselor, the school psychologist, speech therapist, sometimes random staff members, so to speak.
So
that
multi-use. Yeah, would be a multi-use
conference rooms. Sometimes we'll use a conference room. So the room on the days that we're there are our room. We don't get booted for any reason. We can often leave items there. We try to make sure the atmosphere feels welcoming. It isn't stuffed full of storage items or
mop bucket.
Yeah, like just, you get shoved in this closet over here, because we want kids to feel as important as they are and that service to be meaningful and comfortable. So we look at the atmosphere. We look for privacy. So we want windows on the door to be covered. We don't want vents in the door where people can stand outside and hear the conversations. We bring sound machines. We'll try to have, comfortable chairs, usually a table to sit at, maybe a little room to move around, do some yoga things, or just, sit on the floor and play a card game kind of thing. So atmosphere and privacy are big ones we look for, and consistency.
Right. I bet like if you're in a different room every time, that's got to be a little weird.
They don't know where they're going.
But yeah. And is it all ages? I should have asked this sooner. That like, is it, all ages of kids? Yeah.
So some of that will depend on the need that the school has. So we have some where we say, okay, we only have one day available to come to your district. What level would you like us in? Where's your greatest need? And so for some of them, we might be only in the elementary or only in the high school. A lot of our districts are K through 12. And so our provider is there to see K through 12, even pre-K. We've seen several 4-year-olds. It gets trickier the younger the kid because we really need to be seeing the family as well. The older kids, middle school, high school, they tend to do better with a little less family involvement, depending on the situation, unless there's really a lot happening in the family. So most of the sessions are individual, but we will definitely include family. And because family isn't there like they would be at the clinic, they're not coming and dropping off. We can say, hey, let's come in for 5 minutes. Let's do a quick update, or an issue arose. Let's pull your parent back into session and let's address this together. We don't have that luxury in the school. So we'll do a lot over the phone, either text messaging or emailing, or just put them on speakerphone and do our treatment plan updates, or get that little bit of a check-in or address an issue that's coming up. Try to get a little creative in how to include that family piece. Or we'll say, I do need you to come in. We really need to sit down and talk about this stuff. And families are always welcome to come to their kids' therapy session at the school. You don't even need to ask permission, but we really would like to try to plan ahead for some of those difficult conversations if a parent's going to be present.
So there's a constant interaction with a parent.
We try to.
I shouldn't say, I don't know if constant's the word, but there is like, the door is always open, ongoing. Of course, open to like speak with parents so they are well aware of what's happening. And we
want them involved because kids live within that family system. And so to treat that one individual within that system can be really difficult. And if they're telling us everything is fine and dandy, when it isn't, and we're not asking for that information from the family, then we're not really doing great therapy. We're not really solving any kind of struggle or helping them work through that if we're not including that family.
And I'm also going to guess that if, after hours, like the school's not in session, you can always have them come back to a clinic and do that meeting there.
Yeah. So we've done if we say school ends at 3:30, but the parent can't come in during the day, but they could come in at 3:30. We'll just flip their session to an after-school session. Or if we're close enough to the clinic, then we could just scoot over to the clinic and do that there. Or if they can't make it on that day at all, but they could come on a different day when we're in the clinic, well, then we'll just flex their appointment over to the clinic. So it really can go back and forth because they're the client and that's the service, and we can change the location if needed.
And that I mean, if you're a parent, like how great that the service is there, the child is already there. They don't need to come pick them up and drive them somewhere. So that I imagine some parents are like, yes, please. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's one of the biggest benefits of school-based is it removes that transportation barrier. Another benefit that I like to talk about is the collaboration that we can do with the school. So if a student is being seen in the clinic, we tend not to reach out to the schools as much. It takes a lot of time outside of session, and we don't always have that. We have 5-10 minutes in between all of our clients. And so the case management, so to speak, that happens with school-based clients is more than they are with clinic-based clients. And if we're at the school and the principal is the next door down, or they're a 5-second walk down the hallway, we can fit that in those conversations a lot easier than playing phone tag from the clinic. Or for the elementary school kids, their teachers, we get a lot more input on how are they doing? What are you seeing in the classroom? Here's a suggestion that we have from our session today. And so we can work to really wrap around them and create a team around them.
Yeah. So that's a real interesting thing because I have a little bit of a HIPAA background, and I'm just like, how does that work that you are legally able to like speak with a teacher, speak with a principal? Is there a hoop you need to jump through to be able to do that?
Yes, there is an absolute requirement that we sign releases of information for the district, and the parent gets to drive how much of that information is released. So if we are meeting with a kid at the school, the basic requirement is that we have to be able to tell the school when we're meeting with them. And that could be all that's shared. And we have some parents that choose that. And most of the time, parents will allow for that collaboration to occur. And so even if we sign a release and the parent says, yep, you can tell them literally everything you want, we still don't. We're still using our clinical judgment for what's actually helpful to tell the school or to ask of the school. And so the school also has their requirements for being cautious of what they say. But for us, we use that release of information to be our guide, but also our clinical judgment and just our ethics as a profession to know that it's always on us to maintain those boundaries. Even if a student hollers out in the hallway or in their classroom like, I see Jes, that's my therapist. They can do that. That's their choice. But I certainly can't walk into the lunchroom and be like, hey, Jeremy, how's it going? Like, we can't do that. It's always
That was really embarrassing. You did do that. That was very awkward.
Yeah, I'll try to cut that out.
So it's like, I'm sure that must be really encouraging. It's not like a one size fits all. Mm-mm. You're working with your client who is the child.
Yep.
And their parents to like figure out what works best for them and for everybody else. Mm-hmm. I bet, and there's got to be, is there like a conversation you'll have with your client, the student, and be like, what do you feel comfortable sharing?
Yes.
And I'm sure there is ethical things you have to share, correct, but there's got to be like, you're trying to establish some trust with that child. And so how does that work? Like, is there a little back and forth that goes there?
Yeah. So at the intake is when we're filling out that release of information and we're having that conversation. What all are you comfortable with me sharing with the school? What are your limits on that? And we'll even make little notes in their chart in a spot that only we see so that we remember, don't share these things, or these things are free, to help us make sure we're following those boundaries. But with the kids, even if the parent says, yeah, you can say anything you want, if the kid says, no, I don't want you to, well, we have to honor that too. Mm-hmm. And especially when they're 14 and up, we need both the parent and the kid's permission on those releases. Their signature has to be on that release. Mm. And they also have to agree to services. So that can be a little hiccup sometimes when we have a student who we know needs services. It's very obvious that they need some help. They're having some struggles. And the school puts through the referral, the family is there, and the kid just says, no, I'm not doing this. We can't do it. We have to have their consent. Mm-hmm. They are the client. And it's not going to work. Like, what are we going to do? We're going to sit in silence and stare at each other. That's not therapy. That's not helping anybody. No. So it might be that later on they come back and say, all right, yeah, I'm ready. I think maybe I do need to go talk to that lady. But for the sharing of that information, it's also very similar with the families. We'll tell the parents, like for our teenage clients in particular, what you and I talk about stays between you and I, unless, it meets those exceptions. There's abuse, there's self-harm, or like really dangerous levels of self-harm, those kinds of things that we have to make sure you're safe. But we like to remind the parents too, we're not going to just regurgitate everything that we talk about in session back to the parent.
I kind of never thought of it like, I imagine like if you're a parent, you're like, I've taken care of everything. They're in therapy. I don't need to do anything else. Does that happen? Once
in a while. Yeah. And it's easier to do at school where we'll have parents that maybe they kind of forget their kids in therapy because they don't have to bring them. Yeah. And they're maybe not responding to our messages when we're trying to reach out. And it's just this thing that happens they don't need to think about. And they sometimes wash their hands of it. It's like, oh, no. We still need you involved. We still need you to help this, your kid work through this.
I kind of have been bringing up sort of I don't want to say they're negative things, but the kind of the maze you have to go through with each thing, geez, Louise, with each student. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. But it must also be just so great to have so many collaborators right there. Yes. And I have to imagine like teachers and administrators are like, thank goodness you're here. And not just you. I mean, there is a whole team of therapists. Yeah, we have like 15,
16 of them just in our agency, let alone across the state. I mean, school-based services, there are so many different agencies that are doing that now and doing it fantastically well. And mental health isn't always a job where we get a lot of thanks, but in the school, I feel like I get more because the teachers are saying, I'm so glad that you're here, or thank you for taking them. They're having a really hard day. We're looking forward to that session all day.
So light bulb just went off in my head that so not only helping the student you're providing care to, but if that student has been needed extra attention in the classroom and now there's less of it, every student benefits from that because the teacher can divide their attention more evenly.
Yes.
How does, so what happens is it weird in the summer? Are there kids that drop off? What happens in the summer when school's not in session?
Yeah, we have about 50% of our kids will continue sessions over the summer. And our determination of do these students still need to be seen over the summer is based on clinical need, not the calendar. So if a child is meeting their goals and they're doing fantastic and they're ready to be discharged the first part of May, well, then discharge them. It doesn't matter that the school year isn't quite over yet because it really, the calendar doesn't matter other than that's just where we're going to be. So if a student still needs therapy as they would in a clinic setting over the summer months, then we try to continue to see them. That might be at the school. If, some of our schools are a little too far of a drive to get to a clinic conveniently, and so our provider will just keep going to the school over the summer. Our room might change depending on air conditioning needs usually, or easier access throughout the building, but we'll continue to see them at the school. Or if our school is really close to the clinic, then our provider will just come back to the clinic and then those kids can just be put in the clinic schedule. We have some that will do telehealth over the summer. Usually the teenagers who are more appropriate for telehealth. It's hard to do that with a 5-year-old. We see a lot of their ceilings and their dogs and
Sorry to laugh. I can only imagine.
It gets very dizzying. They wander us through their houses and we're like, hey, where'd you go? Hello, come back.
Set it down. And
yes. And off they go. So, telehealth doesn't work fantastically well for younger kids, but if they're those middle school, high school kids, usually kind of 10 and up, that tends to work better. We'll do telehealth as long as they have somebody, if they can remember to get on the session and they're not sleeping and their appointment's at 9:00 and they sleep till noon, that may not work real well. Mm-hmm. So we'll try to be creative in finding those ways. But usually it's about 50% that will continue over. The other 50% tends to be, they are at a different parents' house over the summer, they're out of the area, or they're doing a lot of camps and vacations and things, and they're just way too busy. Sometimes then those kids will stop over the summer and then they might come back in the fall. But we usually say if it's clinically needed, then please try to find a way to continue. And if you can go 3 months without services, well, then maybe you're doing okay and you don't need it anyway.
Yeah. And I'll be here if you need me when we get back to school.
Yeah. And some of them will, because it's the school setting and all of that pressure and the social elements, especially if they have a lot of social anxiety or performance anxiety, that they do fantastic over the summer. Well, then we'll discharge at the end of the school year because that's when your stressor ends. And then we'll pick back up next year if needed, but trying to prepare them for how to make next year go well. And maybe you don't need therapy services and we'll just really practice those skills.
Mm-hmm. Are there common questions or concerns that parents have about care provided this way? And if so, what might they be? And they could.
No, I think other than the standard of making sure that they're not missing classes or instruction that's going to be detrimental. And usually we, explain that we work with the family, the student, and the school to find the best time. And if it doesn't work, then we'll change it. But also remembering that if they had to come to a clinic appointment, they'd be missing more.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And I don't know how to phrase this question exactly, so help me through it. But it's like, what are they concerned about right now? Or what are you treating? Or is there, and does it come in waves? Like currently it's this, and like 2 years ago it was that, this is what I'm saying. I don't know how to ask this question, but I think you know what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah. I think there are definitely some themes, and that tends to be with what's happening in the world. So COVID, of course, was a hot topic, the riots, political things for our older kids. They're paying attention to some of those politics and, or just the state of the world and wars, like that stuff can become themes. Or in terms of like substance use issues that we'll deal with kids at the school, it might be the substance that's most commonly used, or, like vaping. That's certainly become a really big topic, and in some cases has lowered in some areas where they're not talking about that quite as much anymore. And then all of a sudden it'll come back in full force. So a little bit of what we see depends on what age groups we happen to have a lot of. So some years I have almost all elementary school kids. Other years I've had more high school kids. And so some of those topics fluctuate that way. But overall, I would say the common thread across years that we're seeing is an increase in anxiety in general, anxiety and depression. And a big part of that is with technology and how I could go into like a whole hour thing on technology and anxiety and depression. But basically, the more convenient our world gets, the less we have to deal with frustrations, the less we have to deal with discomfort. And so we can, instead of, if I said, and I'll do this with some kids, I'll say, if I told you that we needed to order a pizza and I wanted you to call the pizza place and ask if they had a special and like make a decision about it and call them and order that pizza, their face freaks out. They absolutely not. No, I'm not going to do that, because it's live conversation. They may disappoint the other person by saying, oh, never mind, we changed our mind. Just saying, oh, never mind, sorry, and hang up is incredibly uncomfortable. having to just have that live conversation has become really difficult when instead you could pull up Domino's app and you could play around with the toppings and you could pick that out and see how much that would cost and then make your decision and order it without ever opening your mouth.
Yeah, right. And like, are we ready? Okay, done.
Right.
Send.
Yeah. So those little discomforts in having to have face-to-face conversation, the little discomfort of sitting in a waiting room and being maybe a little bit bored, watching a show that has an ad and now you have to wait 20 seconds or 60 seconds for that ad to pass, things that us older ones that it was not an option to skip an ad or skip a commercial. We found joy in those moments. Oh, sweet, I can go get a snack. I'll refill my cup. I'll go to the bathroom. I'll stand up. I don't know. Those little moments of boredom and discomfort are so overwhelming. We immediately reach to our phone for entertainment because it's immediate. We always have it. We can use it for everything. And so it snowballs into this whole effect of we can't handle feeling discomfort of any kind, whether it's boredom, it's frustration, it's nervousness, it's a little bit of sadness, and our brain confuses boredom with sadness. So that's an interesting thing because we don't need to.
So if you're a kid in a classroom, like, holy cow, I got to deal with all these kids.
Yeah. And so they push for virtual school. I will just sit at home. I won't have to face anybody. I will just type everything on my computer. Where I can type it, pause, fix it, and send it when I'm sure that's what I want to say versus speaking live and making a mistake that might be slightly embarrassing and having to correct it and push through that discomfort. Like when we think about all of those little, discomfort is such a universal word for it, that it is really good for us to have to learn to deal with that.
Is that a control thing? I love like when I have a therapist on, like I pretend I know what I'm talking about. So here I go. Here it comes. I mean, like, is that like I am controlling what I'm watching and all of a sudden I don't have that control, and that might be frustrating?
I would say yes, because as humans, we like to be in control. You are right, which is another thing humans love being.
Thank you for using me as an example.
Yes, I actually talk about these things a lot. The desire to be right and the desire to control, because it's how we feel. It's how we feel safe, and we eliminate the discomfort of being vulnerable. So we have this really strong belief that we can control our emotions and we can control our thoughts. And the reality is we can't. We just can't. We're not that powerful, I guess. And so there are all of these endless searches to control our emotions and find happiness, to find peace. This is where all the addictions come in. It's where, what has now become an addiction to technology too. And we try to find anything to make us feel better rather than ride out the sadness, ride out the worry, ride out the boredom, ride out the irritation. And then we don't know how. So when that emotion shows up, even in the slightest amount, we don't know how to handle it. And it becomes this overwhelming panic or anger. And then we're struggling. Things fall apart. Yeah,
and I'm going to just pull something from our coworker, Allison Allen, has said on this podcast that every emotion has a function. And I'm putting words in her mouth, but I think it's accurate. I'm paraphrasing what she said. So instead of like riding out that boredom and I don't want to say enjoying it, but like using it,
tolerating it,
it's even. Like, I need to change this and control it.
Yes, I must get rid of this.
Oh God, I love doing these podcasts.
Yeah. So a big part of it, like, I could go on a whole spiel about that too. And just learning, we like the wave analogy, ride the wave out, find those things that help you drop an anchor in the wave so that you don't get swallowed by it, but dropping the anchor doesn't get rid of it. We have to ride it out, but in a way that doesn't then cause more problems.
Yeah. So how do you help? Like, how, I don't want to like, this is how you treat children, but like what are you able to provide or that's one question. And maybe the better question is, what advice could you give parents to help with this?
Yeah. And I think they do fit together. So a big piece would be learning to tolerate distress, learning to tolerate boredom. And so with clients of all ages, we'll talk about the function of those emotions. Anger serves a really good purpose. It helps us stand up for our values. It makes us take action, but it can get overboard. Happiness is, it feels great, but that can get overboard, right? We don't want to show up laughing and giggling at a funeral. That does not turn out well. That's where sadness actually serves a really good function. Sadness brings us together with people. It's our use of compassion and empathy. And if we get rid of that, we have a whole new set of problems. So learning to recognize those different emotions, recognize what they're trying to say in that moment, and is it helpful? Anxiety can show up, which is a great emotion. It keeps us safe. It helps protect us. It keeps us alive in a lot of cases. But if we let that run the show and sit right in the forefront of our mind all the time, even if it's accurate, yes, I do need to be very careful about all of these things. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? It's not helpful. So learning to shift those things aside and focus on what is helpful in that moment. And it might be sitting with it. Mm-hmm. So for families, a big piece, and it comes back to the technology piece, is to stop handing your children cell phones. Stop handing them tablets. Stop putting them in front of the TV as a babysitter. Or trying to rescue them from their emotions. So if your kid forgets their backpack and they had an assignment due, please don't go home and get it. Let them sit with the discomfort of having to tell the teacher, I forgot my backpack. I maybe failed that assignment because now it's past due and I lost 50% of the grade because it's past due. They have to feel that. That's how we learn. That drives our values and reinforces, I do need good time management. I do need to be responsible. I need to think ahead. Or to be bored in the vehicle without watching a movie for a 5-minute car ride. Let them look out the window. Let them use their creative brains and figure it out.
Find those other spaces in your head that you can fill that boredom with.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Awesome. So, how's that hard? How's that hard, I guess? Or not how is it hard? It sounds like one thing you might be doing is like helping kids kind of identify those emotions. Yep, you are feeling anxious. This is what it is. Mm-hmm. Is that true? Is that helpful if they kind of realize what they're feeling? Yeah.
So we'll spend a lot of time on emotional intelligence is kind of the phrase for that, of what are the different emotions? What are the feelings within your body? Where do you feel that? Do you feel that in your fist? Do you feel that in your chest? Do you feel that in your feet? Some people feel emotions in their feet, which is interesting to think about. And then what does that look like externally? What faces might you be making? And so sometimes we'll role model that back and say, okay, I'm going to make a face, try to guess it, try to guess how I'm feeling. And really just looking at when eyebrows frumple or when they're raised up or when our head is turned to the side, what might that mean? Is that confusion? Is that frustration? And really looking at those things to help them notice when that emotion within them is building and when to use the different coping skills. Don't wait until you're freaking out and slamming a wall. Maybe notice when your chest tightens or when you do cock your head to the side as a what now? Hold up. And that's your frustration phrase. Notice right then and use those coping skills.
I know in the therapy world, there's times that it's not a good match. Mm-hmm. You and your therapist, does that happen with kids too? And sometimes you're like, hey, it might be better if you speak with so-and-so.
Yeah.
Does that happen a lot or at all? Or
I would say it definitely happens. It maybe not a ton. And that might in part be because a lot of times in our rural areas, we don't have a lot of options to switch to a different therapist. And so they'll just keep trying to work through. But we will switch therapists if that rapport just isn't there. It's really important. One thing that we know through tons of research is the key factor in our clients having successful outcomes in therapy is the rapport they have with the therapist. And so if they're not feeling heard, they're not feeling respected, we're talking about all sorts of different things that just, it's not interesting to them, or that's not the reason they came. Even if we find it fascinating, if that's not what they were there to talk about, they're probably not going to come back. So with kids, that can happen too, because I mean, as adults, man, we have all sorts of thoughts about what they should be doing. But if we're presenting that in a way that just sounds like another adult in their life telling them what to do, they're not going to do well. They're not going to really connect. And so we'll look at, are they getting better? Are they reporting progress? Is their family reporting progress? If not, and we've been meeting with them for a while, then we need to change something up. Either we change our approach, our modality, or we may need to change therapists. Sometimes that is switching them into family-based therapy, or maybe it's the setting. Maybe they are just really closed off being in the school because they know their friends and their teachers are on the other side of that wall. That changes things. So sometimes bringing them into the clinic, they're much more relaxed and can engage. Or they just personalities just don't always click.
Yeah, but
and that's
like,
okay.
There might be so many, there must be so much variety. Like, I know they like this chair compared to this chair, and like lights on, lights off. Like, so there's a lot of variety. Yes.
And so we here at NorthLakes are very good about asking those questions about, how is this feeling? Do you need me to change anything up? I know a lot of times, especially with kids, they'll say, all right, so what do you want to do while we talk? Do you want to draw? Do you want to sit on the floor? Do you want to put a puzzle together? Like, what do you want to do so that you feel comfortable? And then have those conversations. And that a lot of times,
it's got to be empowering to a kid, like all right, this isn't so bad.
Yeah, so I'll go grab it off my shelf. Out.
And you, early on in this conversation, you mentioned that we're in a number of different schools. There's different agencies. Could you just talk a little bit more about, more broadly here in northern, southern, eastern Wisconsin that we're in, like who's involved, like how many schools are we in, like how many providers are doing this? Just kind of give me some numbers and thoughts about that.
So this school year are in 19 school districts, and I think we have 14 therapists in the schools. Some of them are in 3 different districts throughout the week. Some of them are only in 1 district. We have a couple providers who are only in schools. They don't have a clinic office even. They're 100% in the school. And a fair amount of those schools have other agencies in them also providing services, which we love because it means that those needs are being met, and we can't do it all, so we like it when there's other agencies that can help address that need. And so
we'd call them partners, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really not competitive in that way. If you can do it, have at her, I have ideas that could help you. I'll share those ideas to have you do that better. So the referral piece can get a little trickier, where sometimes they'll like deciding, should they go to us? Should they go to one of those partners? Might be based on their insurance. It might be based on who has a time available that works better in their schedule, or who has, that personality that they think would match up better with that kid.
Mm-hmm. And is it all one-on-one or family, or would you like put a group of kids together? Are there kids groups?
Yes, there are. It is the vast majority of it is individual, with some family involvement, where, like we were saying, if they come into the school for a session, or if we flip it into the clinic to do a session. But we have done some different types of groups in different kinds of ways, where we've held groups during the school day. That 7th hour is the group time, and they just come down to the room, they do their group, and they go back to class. We've done other ones. I've done one during a summer school, where for 4 weeks straight, every day, they came to me, and I went to the school, so they came to my room at the school, and I was putting the summer school sign up flyer. Parents could say, yep, I want my kids signed up for that. And we capped it so we didn't have, 20 kids in there or something. I can't handle that. But, and then those topics can be usually around social skills or coping skills, or if there's a really specific thing, like a trauma group, or, whatever the main need is that they're seeing. And that's been another great way when we're only there, let's say 1 day a week, and I can only see 8 kids, but there's way more need than that. Well, then let's put a group together, and then I can reach out to see more kids than I could normally in that 1 day.
I can imagine there's lots of different benefits for that, other than just like being able to see more children, more people.
Yeah, all of the what do I want to say? What's my word? Validation.
Yeah.
Feeling validated in their struggles, that there are other kids.
It's not just me.
Yeah, who feel these same things.
Yeah.
And of course, a concern there is confidentiality of that information. Are these other kids going to go run around and share these things? And so sometimes we won't get too deep into too embarrassing of things and save that for an individual session if we can, and keep it more psychoeducational.
And are they kind of grouped around one item? Or one, see, and this is where I just struggle. I don't know how to, I want to say affliction thing, but that's not the word. So what am I trying to say?
How do we decide who's in a group?
Yeah. Or what the group is based on, do you get let's get all the anxious kids,
Sometimes.
I'm only joking because I don't know how to phrase this.
Yeah, no, really. So we'll decide who goes in that group based on either, usually it's a similar topic. So I ran a social skills group that was open to both boys and girls within a range of ages, because we don't want a second grader and a fifth grader. That's
two totally different people.
Right? So I think I did mine third, fourth, and fifth, maybe those 3 ages. Maybe it didn't even include third. I don't remember now. But so we'll try to keep it within a limited age range. And for some of them, it is only females because of the nature of the topic. They just don't feel comfortable talking about that with males in the room. So it really can depend on what is the need.
Sorry, and this just sprang into my mind, and you can say this is none of my business, but you're a parent yourself. Mm-hmm. Because you're a parent and you see kids, that must, I don't even know what I'm trying to ask here, but it must make parenting interesting.
It does.
Maybe that's not the question, but I mean, what's that like?
So having kids in school ages helps me be able to explain information in a way that they can understand in kid-friendly language.
Because you're living with a couple of them.
I'm living with them, yeah. And so I'm used to having to re-explain things in a way, or, simplify it in some ways. And then also, I'm not sure if my kids love having the therapist as a mom, because we turn a lot of moments into a lot of our conversations on the way to school or the way to sports are really talking about emotions and normalizing that and what are typical thoughts. But I would like to believe that the benefit in that is they know they can talk to me about anything.
So are they you're doing it again, Mom?
Yeah, no.
The other thing that is a little unique to you is that you haven't been able to tell, but in the room with us, there's somebody else. Who is that?
Yeah. So her name is Linda, and she's sleeping, and she's a dog. So we have 2 therapy dogs here at the Turtle Lake Clinic, and both happen to be my dogs. And Linda is one of them, and she's 2.5 years old, and she is a Brittany. That's her breed. And we have Dave, who is a golden retriever, and he's 6.5 years old, and they have very different personalities. And Linda comes to the school with me because she's very social. She loves to wander the hallways. Yesterday we had a fire drill, and she was at the school with me. And so we're walking out, and all the kids are in their lines with their classes, standing outside, and they all have their hand out, and Linda walks underneath their hands, a little assembly line of love. And she loves that. She thrives on that. And so she comes to the school, and we use her all the time, just like we do with Dave in clinic. So he stays at the clinic, and they are very, very helpful in how we talk about emotions and how we talk about behavior and the impact of our behavior on other people. So we'll use the dogs as an example of how do we tell when they're nervous? How can we tell when a dog is angry? What do we notice about their body? What do we notice about the volume of their bark or the tones of their barks or those kinds of things? And then liken that over to humans. What do you notice in your mom's body language when she's angry? What do you notice when dad is nervous or scared or he's, So we really use that as that externalizing to teach that emotion identification and the nonverbal. But then we'll also look at when I'm anxious, how does that affect Linda? She gets anxious too. She starts tensing up and looking around and we'll we'll practice that a little bit of, okay, let's walk around the room really fast and let's look really anxious. And then Linda, all of a sudden she's up and she's looking and she's standing and she's wandering, like, what is going on? And if we calm ourselves, and so then we'll sit down and we'll take some deep breaths and we'll just really turn down the volume of that emotion. And then all of a sudden Linda sits down. And then she might fall asleep. She's closing her eyes again. And so what we do with our body affects other people. And so using the dog as an example is super easy.
So I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because I just assume like, well, it's kind of like how, and I'm sure this is true as well. It helps break the ice. Like, cause like a dog, like, oh, like who doesn't like a dog, like, I mean, I know not everybody likes dogs, right. But in general, and I'm sorry, you dog haters out there. I don't mean to like, sorry. But that's interesting. Like, I never thought of it that way. Is that like to like how what you're doing affects this other animal? Yeah, that's amazing.
Yep. And when they walk into my room, they're immediately smiling.
Yeah, right.
Even if they're having a bad day. I've had them walking in with tears and their head hanging low, and Linda comes up and she's wiggling her butt and she's greeting them and she's trying to boop them. And they just kind of pause and they smile. And so it really helps break that ice and open that conversation. And sometimes we'll have moments of silence where we just sit on the ground and we pet Linda and we mess with her ears and we mess with her toes and and all of a sudden they start talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, so a real helpful tool for you.
Very helpful.
Must make things easier for you.
It really does.
And Linda seems to enjoy it.
She loves it.
I was down the hall before I was connected with you, and Linda came and greeted me. And it like totally was like, oh,
yeah,
hi, Linda, how are you? It's good to see you.
Yeah.
This is great. Jess, what else should we talk about here? Other than, well, here's one kind of general question. Like, how is it, like, in general, how is therapy, behavioral health therapy, good for kids or good for people who receive it? Like, what do they get out of it? Like, what's the long-term benefit?
I would say prevention in those struggles that they're facing now becoming more permanent or larger or more impairing in their ability to be successful in whatever way that means for that individual. I think of so many times people will say, oh, that kid struggles. Oh, I would love to have a 7-year-old's problems. It's like, but when you're a 7-year-old, those problems are everything because that's your world. You shouldn't have adult problems as a child. So if we're not addressing those struggles that these kids are seeing, it snowballs into all sorts of problems as adults. So I think of it as that old metaphor of building a house. If you don't have a good foundation, like if you're building a house and you don't pour footings, it's not going to turn out well. And then you're going to wonder why this keeps crumbling. Why do I have to keep doing these repairs? Why? Well, because we didn't do the work. Like we didn't address creating a solid foundation to it. And so for kids, they're developmentally, the things that they are facing are huge. For those ages, they are figuring out, who am I? How do I fit into this world? Who am I as a son or as a daughter? Who am I as a friend? Who am I as a potential partner to someone? Who am I as an employee? Think of our teenagers figuring that out. Who am I in this world and how do I fit? What value do I have? And so when we see kids struggling and needing mental health services, it's usually because those foundations are shook. They don't know, or they've been taught or given really ineffective messages about who they are in this world. And so they're trying to figure that out. And if we don't address it, man, it just snowballs.
You mentioned, I'll just throw one word, addiction earlier, like you're finding other ways to deal with these things, be whatever it is.
Yes.
And if you're even, yeah.
Yeah. So going back to learning that emotions are good. We need all of them, even the unpleasant ones, including boredom. We need boredom. And learning to deal with that it can turn into this constant chase. And that's where addiction is really this chase. And we throw in a trauma on top of that. And we know there is an insanely high connection between addiction and trauma, and trying to overcome all of the impact of that trauma, all of the anxiety, all of the uncomfortable feelings, the shame, the everything. And so if we're not addressing that, including for a 5-year-old who went through trauma, they don't know what to do. Adults don't know how to handle that stuff. How in the world would a child know how to handle that stuff well? So we need to get in there and help teach them these things for prevention.
Thank you for doing what you do.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I do have one last question for you.
Sure.
Unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
I don't think so.
Okay, what's in your car right now?
In my car?
What's in your car right now?
A dog blanket and a leash, car seat, probably my breakfast bowl that I ate in the car on the way here.
Awesome. Jes Springer, it's such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Jes Springer. If you want to learn more about school-based behavioral health and how it may be a fit for you and your family, call us at 888-834-4551. NorthLakes Community Clinic is a federally qualified health center with locations throughout much of Wisconsin. Our mission is to respond to the healthcare needs of our communities with an integrated array of quality services and actively remove barriers to wellness. Having a therapist in a school helps remove some of those barriers, and we are always on the lookout for more. My name is Jeremy Oswald, and I'm a member of the marketing department at NorthLakes, and appreciate you tuning in. Please share this episode with everyone that you know, and give us a review wherever you are accessing this. Thanks for listening.